Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to our Implementation Science Beachside chat. My name is Alison Hamilton, and I will be your host for this Beachside chat, which today I am delighted to say is co-sponsored by the UCLA Rapid Rigorous Relevant Implementation Science Hub and the CFAR in San Diego Center for AIDS Research Implementation Science Hub. Both of these hubs are funded by NIMH, part of a group of hubs that has been having a lot of fun for the past couple of years. And so we're really excited that our hubs were able to come together for this beachside chat with two of my most favorite implementation scientists, Drs. Anna Lau and Lauren Brookman-Frazee. So I'm super happy to be here today with all of you at our virtual beaches to discuss issues of, basically designing and fostering and growing implementation science careers through partnership. I really don't know if I can think of a better partnership than the one that I have witnessed between these two wonderful folks. So we're going to learn a lot and chat a lot. If you've been to a beachside chat before, you know the format, but just in case you have not been to one before, these are really meant to be more informal discussions, talking with a variety of experts about topics of interest in implementation science. So while we have topics in mind to discuss, we're also extremely open to things that you all in the audience would like to ask our wonderful panelists. So please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll take those as they come to. So this isn't a formal presentation. It's really a chat as it's labeled, and just meant to be a time when we can exchange a little bit more informally, learn from one another, and dialogue about what's happening in implementation science in various areas. So we just wanted to start by making sure that you all have the context for this particular session. Again, our title is Developing Careers as Implementation Scientists Through Partnership. Dr. Lau is one of our co-investigators on the UCLA Hub, joined by the other co-investigators you see here, Drs. Chen-Ching Lin, Jay Lee, and Norita Milburn. And then there is a also wonderful stellar team based at the UCSD Hub as well. So we're going to just do a quick poll, and then we will turn it over to our chat. So Elena, can you facilitate our poll? Thank you.
Absolutely. So the poll should be launched now. And we're asking, do you primarily work in academia, government, nonprofit, industry, or another setting? We'll just give it another few seconds for folks to respond. All right, so it looks like we mostly have folks working in academia on the line, with also a good proportion in government and nonprofit, and one or two joining us from other settings. So great to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. That's helpful. Okay, so I'm actually going to come out of our slides because we like to just chat. So a little bit more background. I had the good fortune to meet Lauren and Anna back in the Implementation Research Institute. The first year that this institute came about in 2010. So it was really my good fortune to meet them and an amazing group of folks who have all gone on to lead really amazing implementation science careers. And I also had the good fortune of joining Lauren and Anna in a couple of their studies. I, to this day, work with a couple of people who've been on their teams. I mean, it's just been a remarkable journey. So we're so happy to have now collaborated in many ways over the course of over a decade. So just by a little bit more way of background, Anna is a professor in psychology at UCLA, and Lauren is a professor in psychiatry at UCSD. They have many, many other titles, but that's not the most interesting part of this chat. It's really about their careers and how they've forged very remarkable careers in this space and done highly impactful work that I recommend becoming very familiar with. So I would love to start by just talking a little, having each of you share a little bit of your respective journeys in implementation science. And after we talk through those journeys, we can maybe turn more centrally to the issue of your partnership. So does one of you feel strongly about getting going? Or feel ready to get going?
Lauren, you go first.
Okay. I'm happy to do so. Alison, thank you so much for having us. It's really a treat and so special to have you hosting us. When I think about meeting both of you many years ago, I'm actually struck by how young our kids were at the time. And whenever we talk, I think, wow, our kids were so little back then. So thank you again for having us. So I think the question is just kind of a brief overview of our careers. So that question is a little bit daunting. So I'll just start with what comes to mind, and then maybe Anna can chime in and we can go back and forth a bit. I think really kind of broadly, I started out in intervention development and somewhat efficacy research, but at the same time was involved in providing usual care services. So that was kind of my initial training, and then moved to services research and expanded to really understanding patterns of services and patterns of care, and then moved into intervention effectiveness, continuing intervention development, but within the context of intervention effectiveness and implementation research. So that's kind of the broadest view of that. As far as kind of where that happened, I was at UC Santa Barbara for graduate school in the Graduate School of Education, and got a degree in counseling, clinical, and school psychology, and then moved to UCSD for internship, my clinical psychology internship, in which my clinical supervisor was Dr. Ann Garland, who then was my postdoc advisor at the Child and Adolescent Services Research Center. And I am still sitting at CASRIC today. And so really kind of grew up at CASRIC professionally. So I'll stop there and I'm happy to go into details about that, but give Anna a chance to share her journey.
Are we ready for Alison? Do you want me to go now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'm already thinking of more questions, but yeah.
Okay. Also want to thank you, Alison, for bringing us together. And this is really a treat to reflect together and share out with folks. But and it's fun to talk about this, Lauren, because we've never kind of sort of stepped back to think about what we did before we came together in this sort of reflective way. So I'll just sort of do a nutshell too, to say that Lauren and I have a lot of similar training background experience that eventually brought us to implementation science, but I think the order of mine is flipped. So also trained as a in clinical psychology and at UCLA, and started out really in mental health services research. So first with a lens on racial ethnic disparities primarily, and inequities in service receipt and pathways into care for racial ethnic minority youth. And then had to kind of make a transition, then made a transition to postdoc, where I was at CASRIC and grew up as well, continuing in that services research area psychiatric epidemiology, and understanding systems level drivers of care receipt. And then wrote a K award. And the sponsors on my K were John Landsberg and then Jeannie Miranda. And I was making the transition then to intervention effectiveness. So I had a little bit of a flipped sequence there, and was really interested always, though, in thinking about how to really employ evidence-based practices to close inequities in care, quality and engagement, as well as accessibility to community providers. So from there, made the transition from, I think, kind of having one foot in the effectiveness world, one foot in services research, was a nice transition and opportunity when the Implementation Research Institute opportunity came up, just as I was kind of closing out on my K award. And I just really feel lucky and grateful for the IRI experience and having been, included in that. And then, from there, I think these really rich partnerships and co-learning have really changed really the course of everything for me in terms of my scientific interests and the impact of the work. So I'll leave it
That's
there.
great. Thank you so much. I've already learned more than I knew before we started. So my recollection is probably a bit fuzzy, but I remember when we met in those early days that you started on a path together around the time of the training of writing an R01 together to look at implementation of evidence-based practices in children's mental health in the state of California. And I think at the time you were being very encouraged by our IRI mentors to do this together and take it on. It was going to be a little non-traditional because it was observational. Hopefully I'm getting some of the details right. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, those early days of starting to work together, design work together, anything that, surprised you or that you had to kind of take on to build that type of partnership, doing that work, and just a little bit of how that all transpired.
I'm happy to, I think we can tag team this one.
Yeah, you
Lauren,
can start, Anna.
But
Go ahead.
We have reminisced about this a number of times over the years together, and how, IRI really gave us a gift in terms of sparking our work together. But folks we've talked about IRI a few times. People might not know that this is a training institute in implementation science that's funded by an R25 grant, where Enola Proctor is the PI, who's just the most amazing, wonderful person. And it really makes sense that she, kind of grew this program, and it's so in keeping with her kind of mission. And she sets a wonderful environment for growth. So shout out to Enola and many thanks, and all the wonderful mentors she brings together. But so when you're accepted as an IRI fellow, it's really a 2-year fellowship. And it's back to in-person, in residence at WashU, where Enola Proctor is in the School of Social Work. And you attend a residential institute for what is it, 1 week?
I think so.
1 week in year 1, and then another week in year 2. So even though Lauren and I kind of both grew up as postdocs at Kazarick, we missed each other. We just missed each other. We had never actually met, even though we had a lot of mentors and interests in common. So year 1 of IRI at the Residential Institute, we met each other. And, a week in residence, you kind of get to know people pretty intimately. You're away from your tiny little kids. And
Unless you bring them like I did. But
yeah, that's true.
Allison's kids were there.
That's right.
Mine were running around, and they were all
That's
very
right.
small.
That
And
was really
my
cool.
mom was trying to keep track of them running around the halls of WashU.
So Lauren and I had more of this time to, kind of commiserate about missing our little ones. And we connected, and then it was really year 2 when we hatched this project idea. But by the end of that first week together, like, we knew we were going to be friends, right? We were like editing each other's work. You had that deadline on the resubmission, and we were, we kind of got a sense of the chemistry that's so important in partnership. And then, do you want to talk about what happened in year 2, Lauren?
I mean, I think that, I would just add to what Anna was saying. I think it's right on that there was chemistry there. I think that we had missed each other during our postdocs, but we had known about each other. And I think that our mentors, especially John Lansford, had encouraged us to collaborate, and I think saw that we might be good partners in that way, as Alison said. And so we did connect as friends, and then quickly as colleagues. I remember submitting an R01 from the airport after HIRI, and Anna getting me under the page limit right before doing that. That was some of our first collaboration, is Anna editing my grant right before it went out. But there was, I think that our joint project that came out of that was really Anna and John talking about what was happening in LA County with the implementation, the system-wide implementation of evidence-based practices. And we were both interested. We had both come from that services research and doing observational study of usual care. There was real joint interest in understanding what could be learned from this natural experiment of widespread implementation of multiple evidence-based practices. So I think from there, we were really linked to the system partners. John Lansford was really essential in that process, and really became quickly a professional collaboration in getting to know the system and writing a grant together. Writing a grant together fosters collaboration, and so we started from there.
Yeah,
Anna, it sounds so simple.
Yeah, a piece of cake. Yeah.
Yes, we can put the link to the IRI in the chat. I should have put it in the slides too, so thank you for bringing that up. We'll definitely put the link to it. So many different directions we could go in. So I don't think I know that's not the only grant that you've done together, but can you talk a little bit about, I mean, there's that whole time of actually writing it and then getting the grant, and that's a big and important time. And then can you talk about, as you were successfully funded and then launched the project, were there things that you learned along the way in terms of your partnership, ways of doing multiple PI work, I think, which is really emblematic of a lot of implementation research. Things like defining your roles, working with your teams, and not just challenges and issues, but things that you worked on really well. I remember we had meetings in various places in Los Angeles, like team meetings that were like the most fun meetings ever. But just things that you learned in your early work that you've maybe carried over into subsequent work that you've done together, and just how that partnership has kind of evolved and what you've learned and done along the way to make it as successful as it's been.
Want me to start, Anna?
Sure.
Well, that's another big question, Allison. So there's just there's a couple of things that come to mind, and that is, I mean, Anna and I spent a lot of time on our relationship, so we foster that relationship. You know, we kind of hit it off at the beginning, I guess, and so are connected and have always gotten along really, really well. But we also make sure to spend time together and think about, you know, we're connected as people, in addition to being connected as colleagues. And I mean, in fact, we're still trying to meet at our kids' soccer tournament now, which hasn't worked out recently. But we do, you know, we are close friends and colleagues, and so that I think that what that from the beginning, but we've always kind of fostered, we trust each other, and so that helps with kind of running big projects together. Is that I think we're honest and open if things aren't working, or if we need. Usually it's not that things aren't working, but that we need to shift or we need to redefine who's doing what. That always comes up, I think, in any project, not just multiple PI project. At this stage in the project, who's responsible for what? So we just kind of were open. I think that trust helped us with being open about just having those conversations. I think one of the benefits of having a multi-site and multi-PI project is that some of the decision-making was kind of transparent to our team. So it may not always be comfortable for our team to hear Anna and me go back and forth, kind of agonizing over the millions of decisions that need to be made to launch a project, but it does make the process kind of explicit and illustrates that many decisions that need to be made, there's not a right or wrong decision. It's just what's the best decision at the time. And so we kind of always from the beginning were open with our teams about, you know, the decision-making process. And I think that having that trust that we might disagree on something, but that's actually a good thing for the decision-making was important. I'll stop there. Anna, what are your thoughts?
I think you and I, Lauren, have said like we will never do a project that's not multi-PI, and we've since like broken that rule, but it's much preferred. And I think you know, when it's a great friendship in the collaboration, that makes things so much easier. But the other huge asset is just complementarity of expertise, skills, resources, you know, what kind of environment can you bring to the project? So for Lauren and I, you know, we often say that like our grants write themselves, and in a way they kind of do, because we really have brought really complementary expertise and positioning with respect to the project. So, you know, some division of roles and responsibilities made a lot of sense across the two sites. So I'm in Los Angeles, so it makes sense for my team here to be the field research team, to be on the ground, kind of with the data collection operations, a lot of, but not all of the partnering and engagement. Lauren certainly did her share of sitting on the 405, getting up and down to community partnering meetings. And then, you know, Lauren brought such a wealth of expertise and know-how in terms of, you know, really characterizing the delivery of evidence-based practice strategies and observational research. She like a really strong background in that from her prior work at Kazarick, really, you know, with observational methods and behavioral coding. So it really just made a lot of sense that San Diego was going to do a lot of the remote work. You know, we've been doing a lot of remote work well before the COVID era, and got really comfortable with, you know, doing a cross-site collaboration Really, we were sort of Zoom zealots for a long time. And then, like you said, Allison, really learned through a lot of fun and trial and error about how to get our teams really integrated. Even though we had distinct roles and responsibilities, we definitely know that when there are going to be times when there's going to be a crunch on one side or the other, and how do we make sure that we don't have that we have teams that can support each other, even if we need flexibility in some of those roles and responsibilities, that we're going to support each other. So yeah, those in-person working meetings and retreats, I think, were really essential in developing the culture of a cross-site team, and things that, I think really led to kind of a lot of continued fruitful science from that one project to the next.
Great. So there is a question in the chat. What is an issue that created a conflict in your partnership, and how did you both work through that issue or conflict?
Well, it's hard to think of a conflict, but there have been a lot of challenges to manage. I would say that, so we had two R01s in this 4 Keeps series of studies. And it's pretty strategic that in the first R01, UCLA was the corresponding site, was the, had administratively was the lead institute, and there was a sub-award to UCSD. We very consciously flipped that in the second R01. Sort of knowing what the strengths of the environments were, quite frankly, and that grants management support was just a lot stronger. And so that does relate to some of these issues, for PIs. A lot of times I think that funding and budgets are an issue that are uncomfortable for people to discuss and work through. And so I think that, what's helped us prevent those things from being like conflicts exactly is really to always just center what's best for the project and what's going to help us achieve our aims. And then from there, really making decisions about budget, I think, are really, really important. But you do have to have trust and know that that we have each other's best interest in mind when we talk about things like budget and staffing. Do you need more staff at UCSD, or do I need more staff at UCLA right now for where we are in, what we need to achieve in this next award period? So that would be one example. And I wouldn't say it's conflict. I would say it's just like transparent brass tacks, and yet can be really uncomfortable conversations if you don't have that sort of trust and knowing that your partner has your best interest in mind.
I agree. I can't think of a situation where there was a conflict. It's just, there's not necessarily situations that come up. It's just that ongoing decision making, and as Anna said, that trust is and shared goal. I mean, I think that we share some goals, which is, of course, what's in the best interest of the project. I think we also share goals around mentoring and what's in best interest for our team as well. And so those kind of help center us. And so I think it may also prevent conflict as well.
We've definitely disagreed on methods. Right. We've definitely, and it's funny because those are the conversations we're very comfortable with what might look like an argument to other people, but we're like an old married couple, right? And we're like going at it over some kind of method or procedural question. And I think that we've noticed in the past that our staff and trainees, like, they seem uncomfortable. And we've actually sort of modeled that this is, we're doing science, and it's not, it's not personal. We're trying to arrive at a decision, and it's, sometimes it's we're animated. But
it's lively.
Yeah.
Very lively.
I think so. So yes, it can be lively, but it's not conflict, right? It's just that process of making some of those decisions is between multiple people. And I do think, again, that is a benefit of an MPI, because having to kind of hash out why are we making one decision versus another, I think it leads to better science. You know, it's even more well reasoned that, you know, we've kind of really talked through the rationale for even just really small issues.
Yeah, decisions that if you were to make by yourself as a PI, you wouldn't even think to document, you would just do it that way. But we've had a process where when there's a decision point, we want to remember a rationale for why we had arrived at it. We developed a decision log. And those things actually turn out to be super helpful when you're then writing up a paper, you're writing up that results section, and then you actually, have a lot that you've then laid out and made transparent. That's actually really helpful for actually disseminating the work as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think in my experience, I think all of my implementation studies, as I think that's correct, have been multiple PI. And so it's really, I agree that so much of the scientific advancement can come from really grappling with the tricky issues with your trusted colleagues. So it isn't, like you said, it may seem like conflict, it may seem like you're kind of arguing, and maybe sometimes you are, but you're arguing for the betterment of the science and in an environment of mutual trust and respect. So you can go there because this is not someone who's saying something against me as a person or in my knowledge base, but we're just trying to figure out what's the best road to take in this case. And I really like what you said too about modeling that for our teams, because folks who are coming up in this area, early career development or early career folks, and people who are moving toward leading teams and maybe thinking about co-leading teams, it's important for them to see how this happens on the ground, not all behind closed doors and the people on the team don't see how decisions are made. It can really help when they're hearing, how are you processing through this? Maybe we see it differently. How are we talking about it? How are we communicating about it? It is a really dynamic experience to co-lead. I see a couple of questions. I think I'm actually going to come back to Gabriel's question, because Chelsea's follows on this issue of conflict, and then we can come back to Gabriel's question about learning on the job. So Chelsea's question is about conflict with implementation partners, like government, clinical partners, and advice for the start of a partnership to lay ground rules to resolve disputes. Very interesting.
It's a great question. And again, I don't know if we have a great example that looks like conflict, but we actually wrote about it, and it's one of the papers that we sent you, Allison, for the references. Really talked about this real need, particularly in the context of studying a system-driven community implementation effort. So this, again, us bringing a lens of observational studies of implementation, how really important it is to give a lot of thought to, what's at stake for our community partners, what's at stake for the science, and what do we stand to learn. And so we always had this right from the get-go, when we were trying to develop this partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and we're writing the proposal. From the proposal stage, we had to really anticipate what's the perspective of our partners, and why would they be interested in pursuing this work? What are the potential benefits, and what are the potential costs or unintended risks, right, for them, of us looking under the hood at what is a very large and costly implementation effort. So I think for Lauren and I from the get-go, we really always were thinking, it's like I've described this, we've talked about this as a theory of mind task, right? Like we've got to really anticipate what folks' competing interests and sensitivities and really what's at stake for them when we're engaging in community partnered research. So we have stepped in it a couple of times, right, in that partnership where we've overreached or didn't check in, and then we've had to do some correction and repair. And maybe we can talk about a couple of those. But again, like Lauren said, in terms of like cultivating our partnership as co-PIs, we also, that's a continued effort, right, that we do with our community partners. And we felt the landscape, the political landscape for our community partners shift under our feet, right, as we're doing this study. So it's not, you know, you don't sort of like anticipate it and then it's done. Everything's changing, everything's dynamic, and that line of communication has to be really, really open. And I know I'm talking in general terms. I don't know, Lauren, if it might be helpful to be more specific.
Couple of things come to mind well, I think that it's real. I think we come from an approach of we don't know what we don't know. And so that is a stance that we, you know, in our interactions with our community partners, that's why that regular communication and regular contact has been really important to kind of prevent, you know, making big mistakes or so forth, or misrepresenting what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so some of the ways, some of the things that have come up is when we interpret our findings in one way, but then, and we make sure to do a check with our partners about, well, is this the interpretation, is this right on or not? And and sometimes we get it wrong. And so, or we're not providing the full picture. Maybe it's not that it's wrong, but we're not necessarily providing the full picture in interpreting findings. And so that's where our processes of co-authorship and including our partners when we are interpreting data that come from their system has been really helpful. Yeah. So that's one example that comes to mind is interpretation of findings for manuscripts.
And Chelsea, part of your question is about advice for the start of partnership to sort of make these ground rules clear for resolving disputes. And, you know, we did not have we did not lay out contingencies for resolution of disputes. Instead, we sort of laid out agreements for more of these process issues, right? So dissemination of findings, what papers are we going to co-author together? What data are we generating versus what data is the county furnishing to us? And so anytime we're disseminating research that includes data that the county directly furnished to us and wasn't just our own primary data collection, we were very clear that those would all be co-authored with our system partners. And so that's sort of been a built-in process, right, for making sure that we don't get to a point where there's sort of a dispute about it, and also a built-in, check to ensure that everyone's comfortable with the use of the data, the interpretation of findings, et cetera. So yeah, I think it could be really useful to have sort of more explicit expectations for dispute resolution. That wasn't our approach. Ours was more of a process approach and a dispute avoidance kind of prevention approach. But so yeah, I'd be interested to hear if other people have experience with that other type of contingency, but we don't really.
Well, and I think there's a piece too to what you mentioned of, sometimes in our partnerships, whether they're in our, teams or with our community partners, the systems partners, we're going to make mistakes. And there's so much humility involved in implementation research, because it's to me, it's exactly what you said, Lauren. We don't know what we don't know. And so we are going to make missteps, and we're going to have times where we maybe didn't handle things the way we could have or in the best way possible. And that transparency, I think, that we try to foster with our community partners includes acknowledging when we make those missteps and saying, you know, I didn't handle that in the best way, or I should have communicated this to you in an earlier or in a different way. And I think it's been an important realization for me over time with, issues of engaging community partners, et cetera, that none of us are expecting perfection. And these are relationships with humans who make mistakes, and we're all going to make errors and have times where we could have done things a little differently. And I think the trust builds, especially because I know so many of your relationships are very long-standing at this point. You've built trust with different communities and systems level leaders over many years, and some of that comes from being who we are, making the mistakes that we make, acknowledging them, being transparent, saying next time we're going to do this differently. And I think there's a lot to that evolution too, of just knowing we're not really striving for perfection and we can't achieve perfection. We try to do the best job we possibly can, but there are going to be moments where we really could do better, and we learn from them, and then we try to do something different the next time.
I really appreciate that, Alison. I'll just add, is in some other contexts with community partners, is the repair process actually can build and foster that collaboration. Beyond that, acknowledging not being perfect, but the process of resolving issues or repairing or apologizing when making mistakes it can really contribute rather than take from partnerships.
Yeah, I agree. Like in any relationships, right? If you can get past them and it can get to a stronger, better place too. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. We can go back to Gabriel's question about what have you learned on the job versus what you've learned in your postdocs, IRI training programs, et cetera.
My first thought about this is budgeting. And that is not, it's not part of our curriculum necessarily but budgeting and even hiring, like personnel management and all of that, is not something that we necessarily get formal training in, but our budgeting process is how do you execute the aims of the science. And it's so essential. And so I think being really strategic and having good relationships with fund management and grants management has been really important. And it's really hard to teach somebody how to do it. It really comes with experience. So, starting with small grants and really listening to what the feedback that fund managers give you, those are important lessons. Those are very important professional development lessons, is understanding kind of grants management. Maybe it's broader, maybe it's probably grants management.
Yeah, I would say grants management, all the compliance and regulatory aspects of grants management. It's good news and bad news, right? When you get a grant, you get to do the science, and then there's all this stuff that you didn't anticipate on the administrative side. It's getting more onerous and trickier and changes quickly. So there's a lot to learn, about this, and it's a continued learning process as requirements and reporting and compliance requirements change. So that's all on the job.
I think learning how to be a leader is,
yeah,
that's what came to mind for me with the question is, it's one thing to be on teams, to be a postdoc to be a trainee, to be maybe doing some of the heavy lifting with the methods and all of that. And we've all been there. And I don't think we could do what we do if we hadn't had that experience of being, on the team and not necessarily being the PI. But I think once you start leading studies and leading teams, there's another dimension of learning what it means to be, who you are as a leader. And of course, you in programs like the IRI, other training institutes, a lot of what we learn to do as leaders comes from seeing these leaders like Enola Proctor, like John Landsberg, in action doing what they do, mentoring others that then we can model, and learn from them about how we want to be leaders too. So that brings me to our probably last topic. These Beachside chats always go super quickly. And it is related to Olga's question too, which is really about advice, opportunities, directions that early career folks can go to develop careers in implementation science. You both are absolutely amazing mentors with extremely strong postdoc programs. Now it is one of your former postdocs, Nicole Stadnick, who co-leads the UCSD hub. So it's an amazing, web of folks that you all have really nurtured through your mentorship. And I'm wondering if maybe we could just close out our time, talking a little bit about how you advise folks who want to get into implementation science as a career, what that looks like. We don't have nearly enough time to talk it all the way through, but anything that comes to mind about how people who want to go on this path might, think about that, shape that direction.
Well, I guess I would just say that, some people are now getting this exposure in their graduate training, and a lot of people are not, right? Because this is still a real growth field. So the good news about that is that if you're not in a graduate program, for example, or you're done with graduate school and you're postdoc and you haven't had formal training, you're not alone, right? And so there are a lot of developmentally oriented opportunities that take the form of these fellowships. And so we mentioned IRI. I know Lauren's also been involved in TIDER. There are other, in child intervention, there's CHIPS. So it really depends on your area, your substantive or your disciplinary focus, but really looking out for these opportunities to get these sort of focal, didactic plus mentoring and sponsorship type training opportunities, they're out there. And I think that, when we think about things like applying for NIH mechanisms, there's a way to say that you need implementation science training that is a real asset for an application. So I as opposed to looking at this as like, oh, I don't have this is a weakness, I'm not going to be able to break into this field. In fact, for things like, diversity supplements for F31s or F32s, for K awards, and even small grants like R21s, if you kind of collaborate with a more senior investigator who is a seasoned implementation scientist, there's really a way to frame a transition into implementation science as something that's going to be, a strength of the application. And so I would just encourage folks to, kind of reach out to people about what those opportunities are, who are the people that can help you get that emerging knowledge and skill set. And yeah, just I think it's a good time to be proposing that you need this kind of training to expand the impact of your work. So just encouragement.
I think that's terrific advice. There's a lot of opportunities in the research realm, for workshops, trainings, and then to build that into your training plans. I would also kind of, on another side of what can early career folks do, is come back to implementation science is about improving care and in usual care, and how do we do that? And part of a key aspect of implementation science is community engagement. And so the other thing is, you know, considering, well, how in small ways can I be present in a community in which I'm interested in? Is it starting to go to community fairs or forums, or, you know, where is it that I want to do this work? And to think about getting connected, because those community partnerships, and so those take time too. And it could be it can be really daunting to consider, well, how do I even start there? And sometimes it's just being present outside of research contexts, and being a resource outside of research context that can ultimately drive your research.
And there's a question about opportunities for international students who aren't eligible for NIH funding or programs, which I am not super familiar with, but I think there are some training programs that are inclusive of international students, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. Do either of you know of those?
It is very challenging. It's very challenging. So I think that for international trainees, you can certainly be supported on a research or project grant as a trainee, sort of as an employee, right, on a grant. But for individually awarded awards, those are limited. I was an international student myself, and recognize that that's a barrier. As far as immersion in the science, though, I think that is boundaryless. So given your area of interest, sort of separate from the funding part, I think that there are a lot of entities that are really disseminating great knowledge and resources about implementation science. So the two hubs that you mentioned, you know, attending didactics, availing yourself of research tools, methods and approaches, being a voracious reader in implementation science, incorporating in that to work regardless of your environment is something that you can do within your discipline. And chances are, this is for many people in their discipline, this is going to be a growth edge that's going to help with innovation of your work and thinking about broader impacts. So I would just encourage you to immerse yourself in the science. International applicants can apply for project grants, just not those career and training mechanisms. So that's an important distinction to know as well. So if you collaborate with an NIH funded person or can develop that collaboration, funding on our project awards is an opportunity. But yes, I resonate with that as a barrier.
Absolutely. And thanks to everyone who's putting resources in the chat. HIRI is another training program that focuses, I believe, on HIV-related implementation research. And there are some training programs, I believe, Dr. Anna Baumann, who is one of our consultants, is involved in an international implementation training program. And Dr. Chen-Ching Lin, who is one of our co-investigators on the hub, also mentioned that there might be a K99/00 that's open to fellows. So there are opportunities out there, and my prediction is that there will be more as implementation science becomes more global, and this work really just expands. I hope and trust that we will see more and more training opportunities that are available to everyone. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I'm guessing that folks have a lot more questions. I know I do, but alas, we don't have a whole lot of time left. So I'm just going to bring back up our slides really briefly, just to share with you Oh, wait, I'm not sure that worked. Let's do that again. Okay. Just to share with you that there are a lot of papers that have been written together by our wonderful panelists. And what's nice about the list is that it reflects trainee co-authors and community partner co-authors, which is very consistent with their philosophy that I've always found, incredibly refreshing, really reflecting just that collaboration, that commitment to mentoring, that commitment to partnership. So there's a bunch of references there for you to take a look at their outstanding body of work. This is just a little tiny taste of it. And also, of course, we are going to, as some of you already know, we're going to be sending you a brief evaluation of today's session. We're always trying to evolve our presentations and modalities, these beachside chats and other trainings and workshops that are available. Elena will be sending you a link to our YouTube channel with several workshops that are freely available. And of course, if you have any questions, please email the hub and we will do our best to get back to you with whatever we can find out about your question. So I want to thank you both, Anna and Lauren, so much for doing this today. I know you're both incredibly busy, and it really means a lot to me and to us that we had a chance to think about your amazing careers and chat about it. And thank you to the audience for the wonderful questions. This has been so much fun, and I hope we get to do it again at some point. But thank you both for all that you contribute to the implementation science community and to me and my learning, and to the hubs at both UCLA and UCSD. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.